What's up with those big hats that drill sergeants wear, like that big hat with the brim around the side? And why does every single branch, including the Coast Guard, use it, but not the Navy? You might be thinking of something practical, like just keeping the sun off your face or something, but there's actually a lot more to it, like psychological factors, uniformity factors, traditional factors, and reasons why every branch uses it besides the Navy. There's actually a massive amount of history behind it and some pretty intense psychology behind it. First of all, it goes back to at least the 1870s when soldiers out in the old Wild West had to protect themselves from the sun and the rain and everything. It has the 4 dips on the top so that no water collects on the top like it might with maybe a cowboy hat or a different kind of hat, like the Civil War kepi, where it wouldn't be as effective. And then, of course, it has that brim all the way around the sides, which protects your face and neck from the sun and the rain and bugs and anything else that might affect you while you're serving. This continued all the way into World War I, and if you look closely at the design of the Brody helmet, which was used in World War I, to me it looks like basically a metal version of the same hat. Now officially, I don't think they're directly connected, but it makes sense. It's pretty much the same design, round on top so that rain falls down the sides. It protects you all the way around the same way. It's like the same shape, and from far away they might even look similar. But then for World War II, we're not using campaign hats anymore. We're not using the Brody helmets anymore, which are completely outdated by World War II. They have the M1 helmet, which is used through Vietnam. But something interesting does happen. In 1964, the Army brings back the campaign hat strictly for drill sergeants. The first reason that the Army brought back the campaign hat for drill sergeants is because they wanted a look that instantly commanded respect. You see somebody with that hat walking around, you instantly pay attention to them and have respect for them, especially if you're a little recruit. And the second thing is, they tip it forward. It's tipped forward by regulation, and it kind of covers the eyes, which puts a shield between you and the drill sergeant. They become an embodiment of the military and discipline, and not just some guy wearing a funny hat. You see that? You see a shield. It's like you're talking to Darth Vader or something. All of a sudden, you're not talking to another person anymore. You're talking to just this authority figure that's looking down at you. The covers being tipped forward also projects their voice down towards you, and that has an additional psychological effect. Also, if somebody's wearing that drill sergeant hat, the person is instantly identifiable as the person being in charge of a group. If you see a group of recruits walking with a drill sergeant, you should instantly be able to see, oh, there's the drill sergeant, and you should be able to communicate with him if you're trying to. And if you're a recruit trying to find your leader, there he is. Now there is one exception. Now the Army, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard even, all uses the campaign cover for their drill sergeants, the drill instructors, the MTIs, or whatever the branches want to call them. But the instructors of that branch in boot camp all use the same campaign cover, except for one branch, which is the Navy. Now, why is that? Unlike the Army, it never really had any history with the campaign cover before it was a ceremonial symbol. Like the Army, the Marine Corps, they both had a history back to the 1870s with the campaign cover. And the Air Force used to be part of the Army, so they kind of adopted that because the Air Force kind of just takes things from the Army and tries to make them their own. They've had Air Forces around the world have an identity crisis because it's such a new idea to have flying machines flying through the air versus a bunch of soldiers walking on the ground fighting each other, which goes back to, the beginning of time. An Air Force only goes back to World War I, and at the time, Air Forces were usually part of the Army or this very small subsection of the military. It's only in recent decades that the Air Force is this massive independent branch, and so they've struggled to find a heritage. This is worldwide, not just the US, but because Air Forces usually come from the Army and they just kind of adopt Army uniforms, so there's that. The Coast Guard has their own reasons for why they have it, but why doesn't the Navy have it? So the Navy doesn't use the campaign cover because it doesn't really have an organic history using it, the same as the other landside forces, but the Coast Guard is on the water too. They don't really have a long history with the cover either, so why are they using it and the Navy isn't? Just like how the Air Force has struggled with being this little brother of the Army, struggling to find its own identity and stuff, the Coast Guard has also had a history of being the US Navy's little brother and trying to find its own identity. but all that changed in the 1970s with Admiral Bender. So some of the decisions that he made were to pretty much drop naval traditions for the Coast Guard to a degree. Now, not completely, because it's still a maritime force, and in wartime, the Coast Guard becomes part of the Navy again, which it did like during World War II. But they tried to get away from being this like off-brand Navy and becoming its own branch with its own identity. So I'll give you an example. They don't use the sailor uniforms anymore. The jumper with the flap on the back and the sailor cap. They've pretty much standardized all of their uniforms into one uniform, which were nicknamed the Bender Blues because he was the one that essentially invented them in the 70s, 1974. By making the Coast Guard's Guardians all use one uniform that's different, it saved them a lot of money, it saved them a lot of trouble with being confused as Navy sailors as opposed to the Coast Guard or something. And it helped to distinguish them as like, yes, we're a maritime force, yes, we're like a mini Navy, but we're also like a very strong law enforcement agency, and that's what they wanted to project, their own identity and their law enforcement capability. One of the things that they did to make their own identity separate from the Navy is do something the Navy never dared to do, which is use the Smokeybear cover that the landside forces used. So whenever you're watching like Coast Guard documentaries about their boot camp, you see their instructors using the same cover as like the same style as the Army and Marine Corps. For the US Navy, instead of using the campaign cover for instructor identification, they use shoulder cords in both red and blue. Red for actual trained RDCs and blue for RDCs in training. And that's what they use to distinguish their regular forces from RDCs, Recruit Division Commanders, which are the Navy's drill sergeants essentially. And they also have like a cookie badge which identifies them, similar to the Army. So do you agree with these changes that Admiral Bender made to the Coast Guard? Do you think the Navy should adopt the campaign cover? Let me know.